1945, delegates from across the Black world gathered in Manchester beneath three bright flags, those of Ethiopia, Liberia, and Haiti. These were the only free Black nations of that era, a holy trinity of sovereign Black states whose very existence ignited hope. At the center stood Ethiopia, ancient and unconquered, a beacon of resistance. This is the story of how the Pan-African movement, through faith and fire, rallied around Ethiopia, how a proud African empire and its Lion of Judah roared against colonialism and fascism, inspiring Black people everywhere to stand taller. For generations, Ethiopia held an exalted place in the Black imagination. Alongside Haiti and Liberia, it was one of the only sovereign Black nations in the world chained by colonial rule. The African diaspora, from Harlem preachers to Caribbean intellectuals, projected their dreams onto Ethiopia, seeing in it a living promise of Black freedom and self-determination. In churches and meeting halls, they recited the ancient scripture, "Princes shall come forth out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch forth her hands unto God." And this Ethiopian prophecy, born of Psalm 68:31, foretold the redemption of Africa from bondage, a prophecy that seemed fulfilled when Emperor Menelik II shattered an invading Italian army at AWA in 1896, humbling a European empire on African soil. Ethiopia's outstretched hand drew closer to God that day, and Black people around the world took heart. The idea of Ethiopianism bloomed a spiritual and political movement that wove Ethiopia into Black Americans' faith and liberation. In the late 19th century, independent Black churches in South Africa even adopted the name Ethiopian, invoking that same scripture as a vision of African pride and autonomy. Ethiopia was more than a country. It was a symbol, a lodestar for a free Africa. In October 1935, that sacred symbol came under brutal attack. Fascist Italy, led by Benito Mussolini, launched a massive invasion of Ethiopia with 200,000 troops, seeking to avenge its old Adwa defeat and build a new Roman Empire in Africa. The skies over Ethiopia darkened with Italian warplanes. They rained down poison from above, a death-dealing rain of mustard gas that fell on soldiers and children alike. Ink. Fascist bombs and chemicals turned fertile fields into killing fields. Through it all, Emperor Haile Selassie I, adored as the Lion of Judah, refused to surrender. He led his people in resistance until the onslaught forced him into exile in 1936. Even then, he did not yield. He carried Ethiopia's fight to the world stage, determined to awaken global conscience. News of Ethiopia's plight thundered across the African diaspora. From Harlem to Johannesburg, Kingston to London, Black communities rose in outrage and solidarity. In New York City's Harlem, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of African Americans volunteered to go and fight for Ethiopia. 20,000 people flooded Harlem streets in the summer of 1935, rallying for the African motherland. Men and women lined up at registration tables under banners reading "Ethiopian volunteers, register here," and "Ethiopian volunteers, register here." African American volunteers in Harlem signed up to defend Ethiopia in 1935, a grassroots act of Pan-African solidarity. Black America was drafting itself to defend Africa's last uncolonized nation when no one else would. Across the ocean, in the Caribbean and Europe, similar calls went out. In London, George Padmore, C.L.R. James, Amy Ashwood Garvey, and others formed the International African Friends of Ethiopia, staging rallies and petitioning the League of Nations to act. From Chicago to Kingston, Black newspapers blazed with headlines denouncing Mussolini's aggression. The Black press became a crucial weapon, shaping public opinion and stiffening resolve. One Harlem editorial warned, "When Italy announces war against Ethiopia, she'll be undoubtedly lighting a match which she cannot as readily put out. Whereas she has designs against Ethiopia, these two have designs against her." The New York Amsterdam News mocked Mussolini as a modern Caesar due for a rude awakening. This was more than just distant diplomacy. For Black people everywhere, Ethiopia was family. As one African American observer noted, if the fascists conquered Ethiopia, a Black internationale of liberation would rise to answer the white internationale of oppression. Every Black man, woman, and child felt the attack as a personal affront. In churches, they prayed fervently for Ethiopia, the land of the Bible. In meeting halls, they raised money, gathered medical supplies, and demanded sanctions on Italy. Even the Brown Condor, an African-American pilot named John C. Robinson, defied U.S. laws to fight alongside Ethiopian forces, flying missions in Haile Selassie's ragtag Air Force. This was Pan-Africanism in action, a Black international uniting to defend one of its own. The Ethiopian crisis became a turning point in Black global consciousness. For the first time, large numbers of African Americans, West Indians, and Africans found common cause in international protest. It was as if, in defending Ethiopia, Black people discovered their collective power on the world stage. Partly because Ethiopia found herself in a dangerous spot, the United States saw a rebirth of Pan-Africanism. One historian noted, creating new political space for African Americans to speak out without inciting. White backlash. A white nation was invading a Black nation. Here was a cause that laid bare the evil of racism before the whole world. W.E.B. Du Bois, the elder intellectual statesman, passionately took up Ethiopia's case. He thundered that the Western powers would never have stood idle if Ethiopia were a white nation. The League of Nations' failure to act, he argued, exposed the naked truth of racial hierarchy in global politics. Marcus Garvey, the fiery Pan-Africanist, had long urged Black people to wake up Ethiopia, wake up Africa, and to build a free, redeemed, and mighty continent, a bright star among the constellation of nations. Now, as Ethiopia stood alone, Garvey's call rang out louder than ever. Black clergy evoked Ethiopianism, linking Ethiopia's struggle to biblical destiny and the coming redemption of the African race. Black journalists and scholars like Carter G. Woodson insisted on teaching the true history of African civilizations, citing Ethiopia's ancient Christian empire and victory over colonial armies, to vindicate the race and shatter the myth of African inferiority. The assault on Ethiopia galvanized these voices of Black resistance into a single choir. They sang of African pride with poetic ferocity, their words soaring in editorials, sermons, and protest chants like verses of an epic poem. Each article and speech became a verse in a freedom song, driven by a righteous refrain: Ethiopia shall not fall. And indeed, Ethiopia did not remain in chains. In 1941, after 5 years of brutal occupation, Ethiopian patriots and allied forces finally drove out the Italians. Haile Selassie triumphantly rode back into Addis Ababa, the imperial standard of Lion of Judah flying once more over the capital. Church bells pealed as the Ethiopian flag, red, gold, and green, was raised again. Black communities around the world rejoiced. Ethiopia was free. The only African nation to defeat European colonialists twice had reclaimed its sovereignty. This victory was more than just one nation's liberation. It was a symbolic triumph for all of Africa. The colors of Ethiopia's flag soon became the Pan-African colors adopted by many new nations as they too broke the yoke of colonialism in the decades to follow, a tribute to Ethiopia's inspiring example. Emperor Haile Selassie, once a desperate exile, emerged as a revered elder on the world stage. In 1945, he strode into the newly founded United Nations as an equal, Ethiopia's survival giving hope that the age of empire was nearing its end. Years later, in 1963, it was Selassie who convened independent African heads of state in Addis Ababa to found the Organization of African Unity, cementing his nation's status as the torchbearer of African independence. Ethiopia's long resistance had become a North Star for Black liberation movements from the Gold Coast to Guadeloupe. As one Jamaican Rastafarian hymn declared, honoring Selassie as their divine protector, "Glorious things are spoken of thee, O Ethiopia." The poetry of freedom was no longer mere words. It was made flesh in Ethiopia's story. With World War II over and fascism defeated, the Pan-African movement gathered its strength for a final push against colonialism. In October 1945, the Fifth Pan-African Congress convened in Manchester, England, a watershed moment often called the birth of modern African independence. Delegates came from all corners: scholars, workers, veterans of the struggle. In the meeting hall, they hung the proud flag of Ethiopia alongside those of Liberia and Haiti, vivid proof that Black freedom was not a utopian dream but a reality in the making. The spirit of Ethiopia's resistance was palpable in Manchester. Leading the Congress was Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, nearly 77 years old and hailed as the father of Pan-Africanism. His long white beard a testament to decades of tireless advocacy. Du Bois had been at this since 1919, but now a new generation stood with him. Kwame Nkrumah of the Gold Coast, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Hastings Banda of Nyasaland, young firebrands who would soon lead their countries to independence. They all drew inspiration from stories like Ethiopia's triumphant return. As the Congress passed resolutions demanding an end to colonial rule, delegates knew the winds of change were at hand. Nkrumah would recall how seeing a black emperor, Haile Selassie, reclaim his throne in Africa proved that colonial masters were not invincible. In Manchester, the Pan-African flame that had been kindled by Ethiopia's courage now burned brighter than ever. One journalist wrote, "Africa speaks in Manchester," capturing how the voices of formerly silenced peoples were now loud and united. They spoke of freedom now, of raising high the banner of African dignity that Ethiopia had kept aloft. The Pan-African Congress formally affirmed the right of all Africans to govern themselves. Delegates strategized, networked, and pledged solidarity from the diaspora to the continent. It was the culmination of a journey that had begun decades earlier, a journey in which Ethiopia's struggle had been a rallying cry. As the conference ended, it was clear a page of history was turning. Colonial empires would soon crumble, and independent Africa would rise, carrying forward the torch first lit by Ethiopia's defiance. The story of Ethiopia and the Pan-African movement is a song of resilience carried across generations. It is the low, steady chords of scholars like Carter G. Woodson, teaching Black youth that Africa's history did not begin in chains, but in kingdoms and victories. And in Ethiopia that was never conquered, it is the bold trumpet of Marcus Garvey, proclaiming Africa for the Africans and urging the scattered children of Ethiopia to unite. It is the steady drum of Black journalists who, in the bleakest hours, kept hope alive on the printed page, treating Ethiopia's fight as our fight. It is the soul-stirring voice of Haile Selassie, dignified and unbowed, daring to tell the world's powers a truth they did not want to hear. And it is the joyous chorus of ordinary Black men and women, from Harlem homemakers to Jamaican stevedores, who found in Ethiopia's resistance a mirror of their own struggle and a beacon for their own freedom. Together, they proved that Pan-African solidarity was not an abstract ideal, but a tangible force. A community of interest of all colored peoples, awakened to action. In the end, Ethiopia's defiant roar did more than save one nation. It echoed round the world and shook the foundations of empire. The Lion of Judah showed the way, and the Black Star of African liberty rose higher. The legacy of the 1945 Pan-African Congress and Ethiopia's victory is a legacy of hope weaponized against despair. It reminds us that even in the darkest night of oppression, there burns a flame that tyranny cannot extinguish, the flame of freedom in the heart of a people. Ethiopia carried that flame through fire and storm and passed it on to a continent and a diaspora. Today, we remember that journey, how the Pan-African movement catalyzed Ethiopia's liberation, and Ethiopia, in turn, became a shining symbol of Black pride and anti-colonial resistance. The drums of Africa still beat in our blood, calling us to remember our collective strength. As long as one Black nation could remain free, all Black people could dream of freedom. Ethiopia's stand made that dream real. And so, in the annals of history, we enshrine this truth. The triumph of one African nation can inspire the liberation of all. The spirit of Pan-Africanism lives on in every act of resistance that declares, "We are sons and daughters of the elders who refuse to be broken." From the highlands of Ethiopia to the streets of Manchester, from the pens of scholars to the hearts of revolutionaries, the cry resounds. Let Africa be a bright star among the constellation of nations, and free, redeemed, and mighty, just as our forebears envisioned. Amanla, power to Africa. Salamta, peace and glory to Ethiopia. The Lion of Judah has prevailed, and its roar will never be forgotten.